in the short period of time, I think somebody got their hands on her.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at the conversation Alison Harris had with Chris McDonough. I'll put a link to that in the channel, as well as the clip that I played right at the beginning from Court TV, when an expert provides his opinion. I'm not sure I agree with it. In any event, we're going to look at some of those bleep statements from the interview room and the possibility of what Alison might be saying there, and also what she's sort of getting at. Does she suspect Candus? Should she suspect Candus? And what do you think? I'll also be doing a live this evening at the usual time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's about 7 p.m. GMT. And we're going to go through the reconnaissance that the detective did of the sort of hotspots. I also took a lot of notes when he did that. I felt quite frustrated in a way. There were certain things I wanted to look at, but overall, very good job that he did. And so we're going to go through that in lieu of this search that is taking place right now, the EcuSearch. We're going to look at certain thoughts and ideas that perhaps people haven't spoken about earlier in these different areas that were highlighted by Chris McDonough. I do also want to stress that the EcuSearch team that are in the area, it's not really a very big team. It's only something like 15 individuals. And the last time they were in the area, they didn't succeed, unfortunately. So the last time they came to Tennessee, they were looking for baby Joe, and they were searching Dixon County for this little missing boy, and they never found him. So should we be pinning our hopes on this latest search from EcuSearch? Before we get to today's episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen, like, share, leave a comment. If you can't leave a comment, you're welcome to go to Twitter and leave a comment there. Use the hashtag SummerWells or join Patreon. There's a active and well-mannered and intelligent community discussing the case there as well. And let's get started. So today's day 40 since 5-year-old Summer Wells disappeared apparently from her home in Ben Hill Road in Tennessee, not that far from Rogersville. And then a couple of weeks after that, on the 24th of July, the interview room published an interview that they'd conducted a little bit earlier with Macbeth's mother, right, Alison. And Alison is a former friend of Candus's. I think they'd known one another about a year and a half, even though Alison had been living in the area for, I think, 10 years, having moved from New York. Besides that, I think how they met was possibly that the hospital clinic was across the road from Walmart, which is where Alison worked. Alison works there, and I presume Grandma went to the hospital quite often, and perhaps that is how they bumped into one another. I also think before we go into the details here, one should stress that Alison and Candus were pretty good friends. There's actually quite a few photos of them hanging out with one another. I don't know whether her son babysat often or how often, but there is quite a lot of them hanging out with one another and doing things together during the day, having fun, and probably on some nights as well. And then there was a falling out, and there is a perception, I guess, that Alison might be holding some kind of grudge with Candus. They're not really on speaking terms, but then her son is on quite good terms with Candus, and Alison wants to protect her son. So there are quite a few of those dynamics that we need to be aware of. What comes out in the interview, which I think is fascinating, is that Candus and I think Candus FaceTimed with Alison and with I think it was Leslie, but there were a couple of people that sat in on that, as well as I think Macbeth. In any event, Alison spoke directly to her that night, also, and I think this was around about midnight, also, observed her, could see her, all that kind of thing. And that, of course, is very useful and very valuable. And we've just heard news now that Candus has been required to submit to a third polygraph test, and she's very nervous about that, understandably. And obviously the TBI aren't satisfied with what she's been saying. I do think it's quite crazy that there's another channel, a very reputable channel, that's been saying, well, she seems honest to me. Whatever she's saying in the Sermon on the Mount, we accept that. I just think that is crazy. But in any event, Candus didn't want to talk to the cops on the night of June the 15th, right? And again, I want to go to the Ramsey case. Did the Ramseys want to speak to the police at length? Well, they fobbed them off on numerous occasions. The same applies to the McCanns. They didn't really want to speak at length. And the thing that is also quite clear to Alison is that Candus seemed drunk and high, she says, to me. And if I understood correctly, that was on the night of June 15th, that same night. And so once again, when you get this impression of poor impulse control throughout, not just with Candus, but with almost everyone in the story. There seems to be a problem with poor impulse control. There's also a problem with Don, where Don actually says that since all of this has happened, the social media has upset him and he got drunk or something, and they've then now taken the children into care. To be honest, I was surprised that it took the authorities this long. It just seemed so obvious that the children were not in a safe place, not in a good place. It seemed really strange that it's taken, 39 days, 38 days to kind of, go and collect the children. It just seems a bit odd. But there may also be a ploy there. There may also be a strategy there in allowing the children to be embedded, as it were, and sort of soak up what is happening so that they can be asked about it later. That might be a cynical view. Maybe that is not what is going on at all. But who knows, it might be a strategy. And what's quite interesting, and I'll get to this in another episode, is the EcuSearch leader describing the search for Summer as a game, right? Him saying something like, we don't know all the players in the game. And that's true, we don't know all the players. And it actually does look like there's several players. And so it is a game of hide and seek, cat and mouse. Do you think the mice are winning? Do you think the person that is hidden away is going to stay hidden away? Do you think the things that are hidden away are going to stay hidden? I just feel that there are a lot of light shining, and it's difficult to keep things in the dark when there's this much light. So just going back to the notes that I've made on this interview, and you're welcome to listen to it again. It's around about 40 minutes. So quite a lot of material that McDonough got with Alison sitting at the table, apparently the same table they sat at when the TBI came to their house, on a previous occasion. What's also quite interesting is her admission that Candus came back to the house after June the 15th, I think on 2 separate occasions. She came personally to the house, and it sounded like she wanted to, make sure that her story was congruent with Macbeth's and vice versa. So some of the notes that I made regarding the discussion were that pain pills were used. I can't actually quite remember the reference there. Was it that Candus may have been taking pain pills in lieu of feeling the way that she was feeling? The other thing that was queried was the thing about how many dogs were there. And it's exactly what I said, just using logic, is you could easily have 20 dogs at a time if there were 3 female dogs having puppies at the same time. You could easily see an explosion in a dog population at a certain point, and then you sell them or whatever, and then the population would fluctuate. But if three dogs having puppies at the same time, and that's what Alison said. You can imagine that happening. I do see the dogs as an alarm system and a sort of a security layer where if you are ensconced in that little shack and you're wanting to party and have fun, then the dogs serve as a cheap and effective alarm system. They're going to bark when someone is coming up the road, and you're going to know what's going on. It's also interesting, I noticed the windows on the bottom floor seem to be blanked out. Like if you wanted to sort of spy through the window, would you be able to? I noticed that in some of the coverage by Core TV. And then this is a quote, Candus was here with her truck and her mom to ask what the TBI said. This is a quote from Alison, and it's almost blows your mind. Not only was she there to ask about the investigation, she's not there to search for Summer. She's not there to find out about an abductor. She wants to know what the TBI are wanting to know. So I think that's very suspicious behavior, don't you? Also, her mother's there. And what have we been saying all along? Why is Grandma the only one that hasn't said anything? Isn't Grandma the key to finding out what really happened? Maybe Grandma needs to be polygraphed again. Maybe some pressure needs to be brought to bear on Grandma. I wonder whether Chris McDonough can talk to Grandma. Does Grandma want to talk? And that was when the statement came about, you didn't tell them about that, did you? And I'm not quite sure what that meant. It was sort of, I think that statement came in a sort of ecosystem in the dialogue where there are a lot of bleeps. A lot is bleeped out, and things aren't made clear. And I've heard some people take Chris McDonough to task, not being very happy that he's interrupted and so on. I think what he's doing is something I sometimes do when I'm covering the John Benet Ramsey case. There's certain things that are legally sensitive. There's certain things that you just can't say without facing legal consequences in public. And so I think he's trying to keep things neat and clean, and he's cognizant of what the authorities know, and he's also wanting his interview to see the light of day, right? So I think that is part of what is going on there, the sensitive side of things. If you had to ask me what you didn't tell them about that, did you? I think what happened there was Alison she says she didn't quite hear what that was about. If that's true, what is that? What is the didn't tell them that? It could be quite a few things, but one of them could be that it's alcohol related, that it's how much alcohol was actually bought. I find it hard to believe that he would go along for one twisted tea, don't you? It could also be something beyond what we know, what is in the narrative. Could be beyond the alcohol, beyond the vapes. Could be something else, something worse, right? So there's even a little bit of intrigue and mystery and holding back in terms of the conversation that is on this table. In other words, things that we know, we don't know. Does that make sense? Then Candus also called twice. She also called on the Saturday, and then from the inside of the cop car, and I think also inside the police station or something like that. And what is quite interesting is that, and Chris McDonough has only just recently provided this information. He's spoken to Candus. I think he's going to put that interview on this evening or later today, his interview with Candus. And what Candus told him was, that, and she's also said this elsewhere, she told it to the Rogersville Review, that don't believe Macbeth, but she also told him the same thing, that, what Macbeth said isn't correct, it's not accurate. But he was careful to point out that Candus didn't say the locations Macbeth gave were wrong or were not the right locations or whatever. just that they were in the wrong order, and I find that quite interesting. I have been wanting to check that myself in terms of going on Google Maps and doing all of that, like going to the various spots and checking the times. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. It is quite a lot of work to do that, and then to sort of figure out what really happened, reading between the lines, where were they really, based on this timeline. And remember, I've been saying all along, the problem is time. So on the one hand, the answer is time, but that's also the question. The question is time. And so now you've got this, and I'm not surprised to hear that the fabric of where they went to and where they were coming from, I have no doubt they went to these stores. The question is, how long were they really at the swimming hole? That's the real question. And I am not surprised that Macbeth's story doesn't quite add up. I would expect it to add up at face value, but I'm not surprised that it doesn't quite add up. But I don't think that it helps Candus. I think more and more clarity is being brought to bear, and it's making her more and more nervous, and it should. The final thing I want to bring up, and it's something I meant to bring up in the previous episode, which just deals with the dynamics a bit with Don, and there's now another conversation with another transcript. I'll be talking to you guys a bit about that. Did you guys know that Donald married a homeless woman? This is before Candus, and she was 10 years older than him, and she's homeless to this day. I think he found her in an abandoned house, and goodness knows what he was doing that he found her there. But he finds her there, and then love blossoms, and there's stars in one another's eyes, and then things don't really work. You're going to laugh, but this reminds me of Van Gogh. Van Gogh also kind of shacked up with a prostitute in The Hague, a place called Den Haag. I actually visited that area in 2019. Her name was Sien Hoornik, and they hung out together. I think they got drunk together as well. And Van Gogh was actually in love with her. He didn't want to leave her. And the crazy thing is, she dumped him. This prostitute, who was sort of much older than him and so on, actually dumped him. And I think you're going to, again, laugh and raise your eyebrows. I think there's quite a lot similar in the story, the true story of Van Gogh, and some of these characters in this story. Van Gogh was someone who often got drunk. He was a womanizer. He's quite a rough-living character. And, of course, he created some amazing art with quite an amazing story. But he was also someone who struggled and was often drinking and womanizing, and that aspect is not really mentioned. He was someone that was struggling with substance abuse, and that can actually explain a lot of the mental illness that is associated with his story. So I'm not going to take it further than that. I am going to be speaking in more detail, as I say, in the live this evening, certainly this evening my time. It's 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, your time, about the search, and maybe some of the other players in the game. I want to still get to dealing with this theme of intergenerational dysfunction, perhaps even fetal alcohol syndrome, also intergenerationally. And whether you believe that or not, there is an intergenerational aspect, just in terms of what happened to Rose, Summer's aunt, is now happening to this 5-year-old little girl. And so what is this intergenerational generational gyre that is going on, that is sucking these people into it? Like, what is this dark force that is moving, the shadow that is moving in the background? I think we know what it is. The question is, how does it actually work, and how is it playing out in this case? And if we find the answer to that, we might find our way closer to finding Summer and what happened to her. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.